of cybersecurity management. Since our last meeting yesterday, I hope you've been doing well. Before we begin, any of you have got any question, any new question that came up from yesterday?
No,
Okay, great. Any question from
No,
you too,
nothing really.
Andres? All right, that's good.
Hmm.
Okay, so even though I hope that the contents in yesterday is still fresh with you. Ah, hello James. Good evening. There's so few of us here, so just want to say hello to everyone. We just started. Welcome. All right, so I'm just gonna spend the first few minutes to recap what we just learned yesterday, right? So it's the main point only, and then we can go straight to the workshop questions. Um, I think the content of this week is pretty straightforward, so there's not much to cover here, but I would highlight a few main point nonetheless. Okay, so this week is about practices, right? How to apply security management practices to the company. It's not about what practices that you should use, like the details, the concrete instance of the mechanism of the security control mechanism that you should use for the company, because it's very dependent of the context, right? But this week we focus more about the process, okay, about what security management practice involve, what you need to do before you can deploy them, right? Before you can apply this practice to the organization. Okay, so the first important concept of this week is security benchmarking. So benchmarking means you compare what you are doing with other external companies. I think that is the most common interpretation of security benchmarking, even though there's different type of benchmarking. For example, you can consider internal benchmarking as one kind of benchmarking as well. I think we have a different word for it later, which is called baselining. But I think we can consider this as part of benchmarking as well, because you're comparing against something. So benchmarking is about comparing, right? So in order to compare, you need to know what is the target to compare with, right? And how do you compare? You compare against you compare using some numbers, and so to do benchmarking you need a few component. Okay, so first you need some data sets from um, the company that you want to compare against, and this data set can be quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative mean that you can represent them as numbers, and qualitative mean that they are basically free text. And there are two things in benchmarking. You need the data set and you need the good data set, right? So data set must be consistent. It must represent like the true nature of the company that you are comparing with. Because if the data set is random, then it's not meaningful comparing um, against some random data, right? And when you do security benchmarking, the data set that you get from the target, you have to be careful that the target has to be have to be of similar profile to the organization. You don't want to compare orange against apples, right? You want to compare against similar companies. That is the first concept, benchmarking. The benefit of benchmarking is quite clear, that it makes you aware of where you stand in the community, and that inform you of what you need to do to catch up with the rest, right? To be at a better position in the community, in the landscape. But there's a problem with it. Um, there are some problems, there's some limitation, or I would call challenges in doing security benchmarking, and it's all to do with this getting a hold of the data set here. The main problem with benchmarking is that this data set are not readily available to you. And the reason we discussed some of the reason yesterday is that the company is very reluctant in sharing the data set containing security information, because security incidents involve um, information about internal structure of the company, right? Like what server is running, what firewall is running, what intrusion detection is running, what malware has been caught, for example. So those information are very sensitive, and by sharing those information to competitors, you sort of like give them advantages over you. So they know more about the internal structure, and they know about the vulnerabilities, and they can use that to their business advantage, or they can use that to attack their own organization. So the key takeaway here is that companies are very resistant against this idea, right? So that's why we don't have a lot of publicly available data set for security. There's a lot of them for data science competitions, but not a lot of them uh, are related to cybersecurity. Yeah, and these are the reason for it. The next concept related to benchmarking is baselining. So baselining is it's about comparing against yourself, right? So baseline is about establishing some initial value, some initial data point, and they serve as a point of reference. And then you compare what you are doing now against this point of reference in order to reveal the trend of whether you are doing better or worse than that point of reference. And this baseline approach can help highlight the area where the social security control is not effective. And here's an example. If the organization, the goal of the organization is to understand the trend, to measure and understand the trend of the number of external attacks per week that happen to it, then what we can do is first establish a baseline, right? Because the word trend here mean that you need to compare multiple things. There must be a point of reference in order to determine the trend, right? So you can say the trend is going upward or downward, but with respect to what? So you need a point of reference, and this baseline serves at that point of reference. So in this example, you can establish a baseline by counting the numbers of external attacks that happen per week over a certain period of time, like for example, in the month of January of 2025. Um, and you can use that as a point of reference. And then after you establish the baseline, you start doing more measurements and collecting more data. And then you use the newly collected data, you compare it again the baseline. And by comparing the new observation to the baseline, you can review the trend of whether you are doing better compared to January, or whether you're doing worse. So the next concept, I think the next key takeaway in this week is that you need a process to do measurement, to measure how well you perform in terms of security, right? You cannot just randomly decide that you want to measure this, you want to measure that, you want to collect the log from this server and the log from that server. Okay, so the whole thing must be structured. There must be a process to it, because the collecting of data is expensive. It's quite disruptive to the system. You have to write some piece of software, you have to install it and run it. And then it's expensive in the sense that you have to store the data somewhere, right? And probably later on, you need to hire someone to crunch through the data. You have to buy some software to analyze the data and write a report for you. Okay, so all of these are expensive, and you have to be done in a structured way. You'd have to come from the top on like what you want to do, what you want to understand, and then from there you decide on what things that you need to measure. And lucky for us, there's some documents out there that is filled with those guidelines and principle. And one particular relevant is the document from NIST, special publication 800-55. It's a good read. I mean, it's long, but it gives you some important information and principle on how to structure the measurement program. Right. Another discussion we have yesterday is about the difference between metrics and measures. You will be forgiven in real life when you mix them up. That's okay. I mean, many people use them interchangeably. But in case you want to be really strict and you want to clearly understand the nuance difference between metric and measure, so here is a good way to distinguish them. So measure is about the raw data, and metrics is about the processed data. And going back to our example, here the numbers of external attacks per week is a raw data. It's what you collected from some system, like from the intrusion detection system, for example. So this is the raw data, and this is the measures. And the trend, for example, the trend like I mean the trend like whether this number increasing or decreasing can be used as a metrics, right? So the metric is a trend of number of external attacks per week, and this is computed over the measures, which is the instance of external attacks per week. Okay, so this is a way to distinguish them. So metric is closer to the goal that you want to understand, and measures are the raw data points. And the center for internet propose few relevant metrics that you can use to evaluate some of the important component in the cybersecurity program. For example, if you want to evaluate the incident management system, then here are some of the metrics that you can consider, like the cost of incident, the mean cost of incident, the mean incident recovery cost, etc. and etc. So you can see them as metrics. They are not raw measures, right? For example, let's take mean incident recovery cost as an example. To compute this metric, you need a few pieces of different measure. For example, you need to have the measure that indicate the time when the incident happened and the time when the incident was fixed, right? And you need another measure that represent the cost of fixing that particular incident. Okay, so this three type of data let you compute the cost of incident recovery cost of one incident. And then after that, you need to get a lot of these couples in order to calculate the means, right? And so what it means here is that this metric requires a lot of different type of data, and this data coming from different sources. For example, the incidents, the time when the incident happens will come from the intrusion detection system, and the time when the incident will resolve may come from a different system, maybe from the report from the IT manager, for example, and the cost will come from the finance department. So all of this measure will come from different parts of the system, and somehow you need to gather them in one place to compute this metric. Okay, so this is basically a data management problem. And there are other security metrics you can use for different components of the program, like vulnerability management and patch management. Let's see. Let's take one example here. Let's see. Let's take an example that you want to calculate these metrics, a mean cost to mitigate vulnerabilities. So how would you calculate these metrics? Like what sort of data that you need, and how many data do you think that you need to compute this? Yeah. This is a question to you guys. Let's take a minute or two to think about this. The question is, what data do you need to compute this metrics? And where do you think those data come from? Okay. The metric is the mean cost to mitigate vulnerabilities. And this metric is relevant for a vulnerability management system. This metric is quite interesting. I think it really depends on like the scope of the system as well, like how many services that you have, or how many server, how many applications that you have in the system. So anyone want to take a shot at this? Let's assume that to present this metrics. Um, you have to design a plan to somehow compute this metric for the system. What you need to do, what sort of like data source that you have to consider, what sort of data you have to collect, and how would you compute this metric? Any thought?
Yeah, I can't speak too much or to that. I'm in a public library.
Hmm.
But if we're talking specifically about the mean cost to mitigate vulnerabilities, well, if you take into account the software used, the people used, the time, the cost of all of that together,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
then we'd obviously calculate the mean cost. And you
Yeah.
can measure that, well, as I just said, that process of, all right, how many man hours do we spend on uh, mitigating vulnerabilities, how many
Mm.
resources went into it in terms of time, um, and did we have to buy new equipment this year? Did we have to upgrade our software services? Those sorts of things. And then every year you can determine whether or not your management process is increasing in cost, decreasing in cost, and then you measure how effective it's become or how ineffective it's become, and then you can calculate based on that whether or not it's actually a viable or valuable
Mm.
process that you're going through.
Yep. Yep. I think that is a very general and valid way to compute this cost, right? And I think this can apply to many companies. Um, but do you have any like specific scenarios in mind on like what system that you would collect the data from? For example, in the incident management system, then for um, the incident recovery cost, for example, then you know where to collect some of the data, the incident uh, related data from, right? To bring them together. So for this mean cost of mitigate vulnerabilities, here you must somehow get the information about the vulnerabilities, right? Is there any specific example of the system that you think that would give you such information, like when the vulnerability is discovered, like when is this mitigated, and what is the cost of it? Yeah. So you gave a very good example of what constitute cost, right? Like the man hour that it takes, and the amount of money, amount of software that you need to um, patch it, and maybe time. Time is another cost in the matter, right? How long did it take? I mean, um, the longer it takes to mitigate the vulnerability, the worse it gets, and that is only the direct cost. But the indirect cost, like it could be like the effect to the operation of the system as well, right? So all of this can be a contributing factor to compute this matrix. And another factor that you might want to consider is that not all vulnerabilities are equals, right? So for this metric, you might also want to categorize, to break it down to different kind of vulnerabilities for different um, set of the system as well, for different like component of the system as well. For example, the vulnerability in the database subsystem would be very different to the vulnerabilities for the web application, for the web front end component. And it will be, and the cost for the vulnerabilities of the HR component would be very different for the payment components, right? For payment systems. So even though this is a very easy term to express, but when you really come down to it, there's a lot of possibility, a lot of factor to think about. Because if you group all the vulnerability together, and so the data might not be meaningful, because especially if you rate some vulnerabilities higher than the others. So even though for example, if you use this metric and the mean cost of mitigate vulnerability is quite low, because some of the vulnerability is very cheap to fix. But if they have some outliers, for example, it's really important vulnerability and it takes millions of dollars to fix. But because of you take this statistic, the mean, that's a statistic. So by having a lot other vulnerabilities, which is like costing you 1 cent to fix, then over time, if you collect a lot of those vulnerabilities, then this number would not be very meaningful. So sometimes the mean cost may not be the meaningful metric to consider here, right? Any other questions or comments? Remember, these metrics only are the guidelines, serve as a starting point for you to start thinking about what to measure and whether what you are collecting is meaningful or not, and what you're reporting is meaningful or not. Okay, cool. Then we can move on. There's some other example on quantitative metrics, also proposed by Center for the Internet, and it's related to the other component of the cybersecurity program, like application securities and financial and change management. Okay. If you think of any other important component, there would be a different metric to measure them, right? So this example to go to show that different application, no, different organization would have a different priorities on what metrics that they want to track, because some organization might not have all of these components, right? Some of them, I think this one, configuration management, might not be applicable to many organizations. Only the big one, they might have this system. But the smaller company, they don't have to worry about this configuration management, or even patch management, especially if you are using some cloud services, and you don't have to worry about this. Some other set of examples are related to qualitative metrics. And I think many of you have used this matrix in assignment 2 when you discussing how to evaluate the training program, right? And one way to evaluate the training program is to get feedback um, through interviews or through survey with the users. And this metrics, I mean, this the data that you collect from these methods are mostly free text, right? And because they are free text, they are qualitative, and it requires someone to actually read through these free text in order to extract out the qualitative insights from this data. But I must say this is things in the past, because now you can use a lot of advanced AI tools to extract the sentiments from what is being written in a very large, very long text, and you can use some model to summarize the key point from a survey, for example, and then give it some numbers. And those models are doing a pretty good job at like extracting insight from qualitative data. So the number of tools that are available for you to do data analysis is a lot. Yeah, very convenient, very easy job to do now. Okay, so that's it about the content of this week lecture. I think it's we discussed yesterday. It's pretty straightforward. It's about collecting the data and analyze the data and reporting the data. Okay, and so in this sense, this the problem of security management practice is very similar to a data science problem, right? Collecting the data and reporting insight, extracting insight from the data. Any questions at this point? Okay, then this means that I can move directly. Then I can move now to the workshop content. So for this week workshop is also based on this hypothetical company XYZ, and this company, as we remember from last week, this is a mid-sized financial service company, and you are free to fill in the rest of the details. And this time you are a cybersecurity engineer and responsible for the development of a performance measure program for this company. So somehow you need to develop a program that measure how good the company is doing with respect to its cybersecurity program. There's a few tasks. The first task that this workshop asks you to do is to read one of these two documents, right? They provide guidelines and principle on how to structure the program, the measurement program. I mean, if I have to choose among these two, I would strongly recommend reading the NIST framework here, because I think some of you have already read through some other NIST documents, so you're familiar with the level of content and level of detail that is provided by such documents, right? So this NIST document is quite cool. You will not be able to read through like the whole document today, but I think you can extract some high-level insight from by quickly skimming through this document. This task one. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm not complete yet. I'm not finished yet, because task one, after you read this document, what you're gonna do? Okay, so after you have read this document, you would need to see how the principle that you have learned from this document can be applied to this particular company. So translate the guideline from this document into a specific thing that you can do for the company. That is task one. And task two ask you to discuss about the challenges that you think that could happen for this company if they want to adopt the best practice, and the best practice come from some other company, the competitor of this company, right? Um, in the lecture, in the slide, we have discussed, we have considered a few problems that you need to consider when adopting a best best practice, right? So you just for this task, you need to just go through this list and to see whether answering these questions is easy or not. Okay, if it's not easy, to check whether these questions yes or no, then it means that it's quite challenging to adopt best practice. If it's not, then it means, yeah, you're good to go. Then you should adopt the best practice. And task 3, I think this one is is perhaps the most interesting one, is you are given a specific goal of tracking and analyzing the weekly trends of external cyber attacks, such as number of block attacks, successful intrusion, or malware detection that the company is experiencing. So given this goal, there's a few things to discuss. First, if you are using the baseline approach, what step do you need to take? And what specific metric you think are relevant for you to track in order to realize this goal, right? And of course, you need to explain why you select those metrics. And the third question of this task is discussing how you can use baseline to identify the area that those security control are not working. Okay, so how can you use baselining to highlight areas where security controls are ineffective? And the last question is, I think this question should be asked first. Actually, is that would you um, would you prefer baselining to benchmarking? Okay, so why would you do baseline if you can do benchmark? Okay, so are they the same? What is the advantage of doing baselining compared to benchmarking, and what are the disadvantages? Okay, so if you selected benchmarking, what would be the challenges that you think you would face? Okay, so I mean, I would recommend you thinking about task 3 first. Okay, and then after you have completed the um, I mean, after you have thought through task 3, then think about task 2. Okay? I mean, these are all like critical thinking question. There's no right or wrong answer here. And if you have time, then have a read at this one of these 2 documents and see how they can be applied to company XYZ. Okay. So that is how I suggest we should do this. Task 3 first, and task 2, and then task 1. Okay. So I think I would. Is the plan clear? Anyone have any question? Okay, cool. Then I would leave about 45 minutes for you to individually think about this task, and then at, let me see, 5 to 8, then we can have a group discussion on some of this question on task 3 and question on task 2. Okay. All right. So I would leave you guys to it. If you have any other question related to the unit, related to the content, then feel free to ask now or type it in the chat. And yeah, if not, then I would mute myself now, and then we can start the discussion at 5 to 8. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Um, let's get the discussion started. I hope you have a good thinking about this task three, so we can start with task three first, about measuring a weekly attacks. So the first question is, let's assume that, oh no, the first question is like, would you rather use baselining or benchmarking, and why? Anyone want to share their thought? Do you think that baseline is appropriate or benchmarking is appropriate? Any thought, please? You can type it in the chat if you cannot speak. Question is, would you perform benchmarking or would you perform baselining for this task of tracking and analyzing the weekly trend of external attacks? Remember, baselining is about like measuring and comparing with the point of reference, right? And benchmarking about mostly about comparing against a external company, external competitor, external entity. So in this scenario, which approach do you think is most appropriate? Yes, King? Yes.
Yeah, I think I will choose the baselining
Mm-hmm.
because
Okay.
the baselining is more focused on the internal needs of the company
Okay.
rather than uh, the internal and performance, how they are doing, and the needs of the company rather than chasing their external benchmark to
Mm,
compare and then catch up with the. It's more tailor made for the company.
yeah. And do you think that is a more appro more appropriate for this case study?
Yeah, more
Why not?
appropriate to
Yeah.
use the baselining because
Mm,
in the cost the mind of the cost is efficient and
mm,
also more tailored for the company. Yeah, and
mm,
because it is ongoing, it can be continuous to improve
mm.
um on different threats
Okay.
coming incoming.
So you mentioned something interesting about cost. You say that it's cost efficient, right? Can you elaborate on that? So you seem to imply that baselining is cheaper than benchmarking. Why is that? Why is that so?
Um, uh, I think the cost is different because if
Mm,
there is an external benchmark, somehow there should be some external organization and fees to
mm,
do the access, and
yeah.
there must be cost a certain amount. For
Mm,
example,
yeah.
like mentioned in the in the lecture and in my past experience, the PCI DSS, which is for the payment card industry,
Mm-hmm.
it, there's lots of the companies doing such services, but not every company get the PCI DSS because it
Yeah.
costs a lot to catch up your company to fulfill the requirement, and
Yeah.
also you have may need to pay a large amount to third party assessment unless you have to get certain license or engage with the like with a master on the business
Mm,
agreement. Rather than that, if it is not essential requirement, it is not appropriate to choose the benchmarking.
Yeah.
Baselining is much more fit the company.
Yeah. I think I agree with you there. I think baselining give you a lot of freedom, right? But benchmarking, you might need to follow standards and it might be costly, but baselining, you can be more flexible. It depends on the resources. So you can choose what to baseline. And you are right in saying that um, from reading this scenario, it looked like what the company wants at this stage is more about understanding itself, right? How it performs, rather than comparing it against a competitors. So if it's about understanding how you perform and tracking the progress, then baselining seems to be a good approach here. Yeah. Right. Okay. So anyone else have other thought? Anyone would advocate for benchmarking?
Well, I would say benchmarking can be useful just so you would have another point of reference, because otherwise, if you only based everything on your own metrics, you can kind of self-proving. So you don't know if your metrics actually good or bad. Maybe you don't see anything at all with metrics. There's no way to tell, just see numbers. They're good,
Yeah.
and that doesn't mean everything is fine.
Mm.
So if you have an option to have some external validity in form of benchmarking, definitely I would pursue that opportunity, or at least try to do it. At least maybe not make it as a, again, definitely not make it as a base one, because I assume it will be really hard to find the appropriate benchmark, because every company is different, and it's not many of those, I assume, like in security. It's not public information. It's all private. It's all paid. But if you can get one, definitely would be a good, like second point of reference. So I would use baselining, but if possible, kind of try validate it with benchmarking.
Okay. But the opinion is that you would still start with baselining, right? You would
Yes,
not
yes,
start
yes.
with benchmarking.
But I mean, I wouldn't completely scratch off benchmarking if it's possible. Might
Of
not be
course, of
possible.
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, so I think we have an agreement here that we would start with baselining first, and then at certain point, when we think, for example, we keep doing baselining, and then we see that, oh, we improving pretty good, right? We are in the right track. And then at certain point, once we think we're satisfied with the improvement, then we can start looking outside, right? This is where benchmarking start to become useful. Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah. I
I
thought
think
about
that's the start.
example. Basically,
Mm.
if let's say you're trying to detect intrusions as a
Mm-hmm.
your metric,
Mm.
and you have your baseline, for example, you know how many intrusions you get, and
Okay.
you work with that. Um, but let's say if you would know that all around you suddenly they have much more intrusions, but your numbers doesn't increase, this probably
Mm.
means that you are not detecting those intrusions.
Wait a minute. Can you repeat that scenario? So you say that all around you there's more intrusion.
Well, let's say there's a benchmark, and you know that the industry has this many attempts of intrusions, but you don't
Mm-hmm.
just do not see them. And this might actually mean that your system is not really resilient, and you don't detect intrusions, because why everyone has them and you don't, or why you're so different.
Ah, interesting. So because when you first mentioned that, I would have thought like if you don't detect them, it means you are doing better. But
Yes, but if everyone does it and you don't, like, I mean, if you detect them and you stop them, that's one story. But
mm-hmm.
if you don't see them, like if you see that all around you something increases, but in your system it doesn't, it's a
I
for me
mean,
it will be a flag to check.
that'd be hard to interpret, right? It could be that yeah, I think this very interesting case that you see the competitor getting targeted and their system flag up a lot of intrusion. but those system didn't flag up intrusion. So would you be worried or would you be happy? I think in Zoltech is that you should be worried. But
well,
okay.
I guess what I'm saying, there are two metrics. One metric is what happened, and another metric is what I did about it, kind of. So if what I did about it is going better, that's great. But if what happened for everyone is something, and for me is different, suddenly, right? The trends are different. That's for me would be a flag to at least check what's happening. Why is it different? Why why no one target me as others, for example?
Okay.
Am I not interested for everybody?
Okay. I mean, couldn't it be couldn't be a simple example is that your system is doing so well that you don't see them? I mean, that didn't
Well,
happen to
I
you.
would still expect I detect them as intrusion
Okay.
attempt,
Okay.
right? If I don't see them at all, then means probably I don't detect them.
Okay, so
Not-
false negative. So they are false negative in those
Yeah.
system. Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
So
So
benchmarking
yeah.
would be helpful for this matter, I think.
I think so. Yeah. So I think you bring up a very good point. It's a false sense of security here. If you don't compare with our competitor, right? If you see that those system didn't flag up anything after a while, at first it's performed very well. Like it's detect like 100 of them, and then later on it doesn't detect one or two, then you might think that the system is doing well, right? But as you said, only by comparing with the other would you say that would you see that this is actually quite bad that if you don't detect anything. Yeah. Okay. This is interesting example. So let's bring it up to the second question. What specific metric you would track? And one of the things that Andre mentioned is a number of detected attacks, right? What else would you be tracking?
Well, one will be detected attacks, and another would be blocked attacks. How much been blocked, and of course, how much was successful.
How would they be different? I mean, if you detect it, why would you not have blocked it?
Well, it depends on the system, of course. Not everything can be blocked on the spot. Sometimes you would only block it after the fact, because it let's say it went through some systems and only then it's been stopped, for example. If we could block every attack, of course, it would be ideal, but I don't think that's theoretically possible.
Okay. Yep.
I would have, let's say, a metric of malware detection. So if a system finds malware on disk, this would be a flag again that attack was successful but not detected, but damage was done. I would probably do a metric of response time, how quickly system responded to the attack. And I would do maybe attack types, let's say phishing or DDoS or intrusion attempts. So I would like to see by type how this changes in time.
Okay. Yeah. So all of these metrics are simple counting, right? Counting the numbers.
Yes.
What other sort of information that you think that is meaningful for you to analyze the trends? Because the question is not about tracking, but about analyzing the trend as well, right? So beside the raw numbers, beside the raw counts, in terms like how many attacks that happen and how many can be blocked, but what other sort of information that you can collect to paint a more meaningful pictures of the trends of attacks?
Well, probably again, on top of that, I would collect information on user activity, how many users are in the system, what time of date. That can also be insightful if, let's say, user behavior pattern suddenly changed. Will be question why that happened. I can then basically create those kind of create a second level of metrics based on this primary metrics. So let's say calculate who is attacked mostly, like which accounts are attacked most of the time.
Ah, okay. So the
Let's say,
victims.
yeah,
I see.
yeah,
Okay.
or let's say what is the time pattern of the attack? Like what's the time of the day when there's the most attack, when the least attacks, and
Yeah.
how this correlates with
Very
the
interesting.
user
Yeah.
activity, for example. So there can be lots of secondary metrics, and I assume in
Yeah.
time they will be developing more and more inside of metrics. As long as you have primary data which you can collect, you can then build on top of that a lot.
So what sort of primary data what sort of raw data that you have here? I mean, if you say that as long as you have the data, so what sort of raw data
So the
that you're
raw
expecting?
data would be mostly traffic logs, I assume. Different activity logs, traffic logs, access logs, scan logs.
Okay.
So information of what happened in the system.
Okay.
In different perspectives, and then and then of course, if you can group this by user type, user category, let's say attack category, that can be even better.
Yeah, so that would give you like the target of the attacks, right?
Yeah. Also, if possible, I would try to link the data sets. So link attack type and user accounts, link attack types and machine IPs, so as much as possible, make this data set work together, not have individual metrics.
Yeah. So those metrics seem to focus on the victims, right? How about the attacker themselves? Do you think that you can have some metrics related to the attacker?
Well, yes. I mean, if we have malicious traffic, we can collect much about attackers, attacker IPs, attacker geo zones, for example, time of days again, attacker systems, for example, Unix, Linux. We can look which, let's say, which geo locations prefer which attack types, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, all of these metrics, not all of them would be useful all the time. I assume some of them might help once in a while, but it's kind of nice to have this, and nice to have this as much as possible, because again, it doesn't cost that much as long as you collect the data. Processing them happens pretty quickly these days, and there are lots of different tools you can employ to build dashboards, to build interactive querying systems where you can run queries and just get results. I wonder if I could use graphs, for example, for this matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had in the past experience of Neo4j database, so that can be pretty insightful as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned it's cheap, but I assume that it's only true if you already have the data, and it's only cheap in the sense that you compute the metrics, right?
Yeah, computing metrics is cheap, and storing them are also now becoming very cheap. The disks are quite cheap now, so you can collect a lot of data and it doesn't cost that much that used to.
Yeah. So I would say that those metric would not be secondaries at all. I think they're quite important. It's not only the raw counts. It's not only the numbers, like because there's different numbers. Yeah, have different meanings.
I don't say secondary in terms of importance. I say that they will be built on top of primary metrics.
Yeah. 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 So that's good. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for the insight. I think when people first read this question, they would think about, oh, let's get the counts, get the numbers. But I think the key point here is not only you want to track. I think the tracking is you can use the numbers, the total count to track, but to analyze, it means to understand a little bit about the trends, and you need more information. You need to understand where the attack come from, and what is the target of the attack, and how they evolve over time. Right, so that is quite important. So for example, one of the metric that you can compute is for admin people, for this certain group of user, like how many attacks that happen to them, target them specifically over a week. And if you see it increasing, or if you see not reducing, then this is where you should spend the resource in training, right? And to fix those problems. Yeah, so it's not only about the total count. It's about you want the baseline to actually to see whether you are improving in certain departments or not. Right? So you can focus on resources. Yeah. It's very interesting, very insightful. Thanks, Andre. Anyone else want to share their thought on what you think are the important metric that you can use for this task? Given the goal is to track and analyze the weekly trend, right? So what metrics, beside from what we discussed, you think could be relevant? Yeah, I think we cover pretty much a lot more than I think this question is intended for. Right? So this metric give you a very detailed picture of what's going on with the company. Right? So as long as you have the raw data, as long as you have collect very fine-grained data, then you can do a lot of computation and compute a lot of relevant metrics for this task. All right, so this is task 3. I think let's have a quick discussion on task 2 on best practice, right? So let's assume that this organization want to adopt best practice from another company, right? Like let's say there's another company, like ABC, that publish is best practice, and this company XYZ want to just adopt them. So this question is this task asks you to consider all of the challenges that you need to address before taking those best practice and apply it to the XYZ corporation. So what do you think would be the main challenge, the main obstacles in just directly adopting the best practice from that other company to this company? What do you need to look out for? I mean, is this you can just take those best practice and implement them as is to the organization, but is that right? Or what is the main risk of doing so? I think this is a better way to ask it. What is the main risk of just taking the best practice from a
The risk
different company?
could be that the company you copying is not resemble your company. So
Okay.
that's basically what it has in your bullet points here.
Mm.
So if your organization is not equal to the same organization, you have to look into let's say what is the difference, what's how your company is different, and you have to adjust the practices for your company, for your structure, for your size, because let's say that that company might be different size, more employees, and more strict, let's say, management. And if you take this all practice to yourself, you will find out you have to do too much of the paperwork, too much of the bureaucracy, and that kind of slows you down because, or let's say you don't have certain management positions, certain sections in your company, non-existing at all, and you don't have a budget to build to create them, but they required by this. Then in industry, for example, same issue. If you have one in even in similar industries, there might be different regulations, different laws even, and but it all works for industry A might not work for industry B. Even if they kind of might be similar, but they have regulations, for example, in different bodies. So that has to be adjusted. The challenges and can be different for different companies. So something what one company does very well, another company struggles, and vice versa.
Why is that? I mean, even let's assume that the other company is the same industry, same domain. do you think that two very similar company would face similar challenges?
Not necessarily. Again, it depends on
Mm-hmm.
what they do, what the objectives, what is the structure, how they do
Yeah.
what they do, what technologies
Yeah.
they use. So it might be totally different. Let's say one company might use Scrum for developing, another company might use
Yeah.
something else, and this
Mm.
means the whole development process is different, even if result is practically the same.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think it's true to say that there's no two company are exactly the same, right?
yeah,
It's no,
definitely.
yeah. Then I mean, even a minor difference in the structure or in the personnel.
Yeah, structure
would-
the same thing. If you like, definitely structures mostly are different. Like no one creates a company exactly as
Mm.
other one.
Yeah.
So you might need to either change your structure to be able to use this practice, or you have to change the practice to work for your structure.
Yeah.
Resources. Resources can be different and can be different by a lot, depends on investors or anything else. I saw this myself firsthand with different couple of companies. Well, they have very different resources available to them, and the list of threats again may not be the same. Even for companies which work in similar industries, again because of the different way they do things.
Yeah.
This might
Yeah.
create different
Yeah.
threats, or let's say they have different circumstances, different projects they perform.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all of this has to be taken into account before you can
Uh,
apply this practice to your organization.
I think that even so, two branch of the same company doing similar thing, as if they locate at different location, they will be subjected to different threats too. So it
Yeah.
means that it's really hard to have a two company that have a similar threat profile or similar or similar very similar structure or similar challenges. So yeah, well that's good. I think so. The consensus here is that it's not just straightforward just to take the best practice of one company and apply it to your own company, right? And yeah, people should be advised against that. They should just take those best practice as guidelines only and design one that is highly customized to your environment.
Yeah, I guess if you
Okay.
take even NCIT, they usually are written very broad terms, like because they actually design them to work for any company. But in this case, you still need to adopt them before you can use them.
Yeah.
For your scenario.
And this is the same. It's true for best practice as well as for general guidelines. Okay. Thanks, Andres. Very insightful as per usual. So I think we out of time. So I think we will end here. So thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for the discussion. I will see you guys next week then. Have a good night. Bye.
You.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.